That's sort of my hope, on my Christmas wish list for 2025.
I'm not getting you anything, okay?
No
presents.
Oh, Richard,
Sorry.
that's unlike you. So Richard, if you could change one thing about the media next year, in a year, what would it be?
It's not going to happen, but I would wish the news media, it's not about the media as a whole, but the news media recognize their number one purpose is to inform people, not to entertain people. I would like to think that news media will give less emphasis to celebrity gossip, to scandal, to personalities. But I recognize why they do that, because it puts bums on seats, it brings people in and it raises money, it gets advertising. But the core purpose of news media must be to inform people about why the world is as it is and why it isn't better than it is, and to ask really difficult questions and to demand answers from people who don't want to give you answers.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's a seriousness to it, but there's also this idea of sense making, which is that we're in this age of abundance with information. People can get access to information anywhere. They're being targeted by hyper-personalized ads and influence campaigns, and the media's role to unpack all of that and repackage it in a way that represents the public and their interests and gives that voice, I think is so critical now, because, what's going to be paid attention to by the power brokers and decision makers is that voice, to act in that interest. And so that's what we really need media to step up to, news media to step up to, is that role, that function.
Well, there's something else I'd like to happen in the year ahead, but again, it won't. Of course, everybody cares about the future of the world, the future of the planet. Everyone cares what the Westminster or the Holyrood or wherever government decides. But the things that affect you day and daily are stuff that happens where you live. It's what the local council does or doesn't do. It's where the new houses are going to be built, whether the roads are swept, all of that stuff. And local journalism is hanging on by a thread. And it's absolutely crucial that together we find a way to encourage local media, because that's what informs the things that really matter most to people's daily lives.
And I think the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has tapped into that. I know she wants to launch a local journalism inquiry. We have had many of these over the years, over the past decades. So I think what we're probably looking for there is a very short inquiry, consolidating all that we know, and for a government to adopt a set of recommendations that actually gives action and effect to this need.
And just to apply my normal sense of pessimism to the argument, launching a public inquiry is easy.
Yes.
Doing something is more difficult.
Exactly.
Let me think, is there an example of that? Yes, called Leveson.
Yes, well, we're coming up to 10 years of Leveson now. And obviously we are still carrying that torch for the system overall. Next year could be interesting in terms of, obviously we're going to start to see in January the case of Prince Harry, and Tom Watson, I think, is now the last standing defendant on that particular action. And we may see through that trial as it plays out, some of those kind of defining milestones of that period and why it's still directly relevant today to the way the press conducts themselves. And what I really love to see in 2025 is, that conversation about what effective redress looks like for people that have been wronged and harmed. Because we know our justice system is on its last legs. It finds it impossible to deal with these types of cases. It's really, really challenging for both victim claimants, but also publisher defendants to navigate the system. And, one of the visions of Leveson, and one which we would like to carry forward into next year, would be, how do we create an alternative system that helps triage those matters and make sure that both, victims of press abuse, but also publishers who are facing slaps and other types of vexatious claims are able to get to quick and effective resolution. And that is something that we will always champion it and impress, and we hope to see really activated by the use of our services going into 2025.
So, are we optimistic about the year ahead or pessimistic?
I think we are optimistic. I think we are going to employ, though, that healthy skepticism about any presumptions we may have about the way things are going to go. And I think one of the benefits of working in an organisation like Impress is that we are, because we're independent and because we're agile, we can flex and adapt to what comes our way. But at our core, our mission stays the same, which is making sure people have access to trusted information. And we will do, within our mandate, what we can to make that possible. And I mean, one of the things I'm really excited about for Impress next year is that we've been working in development with the University of Huddersfield and Innovate UK to develop a new set of products around education, training and ethics. And this is going to be, I think, one of our pathways through that kind of conflict of financial dependency, which is to bring online this really exciting program that we think will enable journalists from all pathways, not just traditional ones, who go through university education, for example, to upskill, to situate themselves in a network and community of peers where they're doing shared learning, shared knowledge and best practice exchange. And I think that's going to be a really, quite transformative way of thinking about continuing professional development for the industry going forward, because we know a program like this doesn't exist and is something that we know there's a real need for out there.
And not just in the industry, but amongst consumers, the general public.
Yes.
With this term media literacy, invented 100 years ago, but there isn't any sustained effort by anybody to actually help the public recognize the way in which news is created, the way in which it's edited, the way in which it is selective and aimed at, very often, sadly, aimed at reinforcing the views that individual users have already formed. In other words, as we've seen, particularly in North America, in the Trump eras, how with Fox News, people who watch Fox News go to Fox News because they support Trump, and everything they see about politics on Fox News tells them they're right to support Trump. There's no pretense of impartiality or breadth of opinion. And it's crucial that one of our missions is to try to help the public apply what I call a due skepticism. Good journalists also always apply due skepticism. And we need to encourage the public to be skeptical about what they see and hear and read. And my sort of rule of thumb is, the more surprising a story is when you see it online or you hear it on the radio or you read it in the paper, the more surprising it is, the more you should think, I wonder if that's the whole story. Because the more surprising it is, the more likely it is that something is not quite right about it.
And it's so interesting in this context now where people are spending more and more time in media than ever before. I don't think we've had a time in human history where people haven't spent so much time, particularly in their device settings, watching media, consuming media, sharing and exchanging it. But you're right, in terms of having access to resources and support and guidance around putting some guardrails in place, that is, there is a lack there. And I hope we can.
It's one of the reasons I think we launched a podcast series, haven't we, called about misinformation, disinformation, called Misdiz, or is it Dismiss?
Dismiss.
It's Dismiss. It's Dismiss. Right. And one of the principles, I think, which gives us some hope for the future is that although the ubiquity now of the internet, people even living in the most remote parts of the world very, very often now have mobile phones and can access information. And we know that they often access misinformation or disinformation. But the good news is that if you can access those things, you can also access
the World Wide Web, and you can do your own research. And when you think something sounds a bit suspicious, as long as you know that there are fairly reliable sources out there, you can find them. You go look on those reliable news sites, and if there's no reference to this amazing story, then it should at least tell you to be skeptical about whether the amazing story is actually true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's sort of my hope, on my Christmas wish list for 2025.
I'm not getting you anything, okay?
No
presents.
Oh, Richard,
Sorry.
that's unlike
Yeah.
you. My wish list this year is for the public to engage in a more thoughtful way with reliable media sources. And I know that there is, this plethora of information out there. And people have different types of relationships with it. But this isn't about, you having to have a certain educational background or cultural background in order to be able to think through these issues around your media consumption, and being able to turn to reliable sources that are accountable, that follow editorial standards, accepted editorial standards, and engage with their audience meaningfully. I mean, that's always been, to me, one of the pillars of the Impress scheme, our regulatory scheme overall, is we require publishers to engage with their users, with their readers, and enter into that meaningful dialogue and exchange about standards and practice. I think that, for me, is still critical, is that publishers are not just these institutional linear providers of information. They're people, and they can get things wrong, and having a good relationship with their audience is the way to let truth emerge by having that dialogue.
Exactly right. And journalists, just human beings, well, most of that, and they get things wrong. Of course they do. We all make honest mistakes, and it's really important that any publisher that wants the public to have trust in them, faith in them, shares with their audience the fact that there is a complaint mechanism. But if you think something is wrong, particularly if you think something is deliberately wrong, is unethical, there is a truly independent body you can go to, case of Impress, to make a complaint and have it speedily examined. And then, if there is an adjudication in your favour, you can be satisfied that the publisher will be required to publish an apology with appropriate prominence.
I mean, picking up on that point, though, around mostly human journalists, we've had a year of AI journalism. Do we think there was overhype? Was it a flash in the pan, or is AI journalism here to stay?
Oh, we had seen nothing yet. AI is now affecting everything we read and see. We just don't know that it is, but AI is being used in newsrooms across the world and across all media to some extent. The question is the extent to which you use AI, and how much you, as a publisher, how much you rely upon the information which AI furnishes to you. Because like any source of information which just scrapes information from a wide range of sources, the accuracy and reliability of what you come up with still depends upon the accuracy and reliability of all the stuff that you scooped into that pot. But we have a long way to go, and I guess even within the next year, we will see more people at home using AI to actually go out and find information for them.
I mean, we were a little bit ahead of the curve in producing a code in 2022 that referred to AI, particularly around accuracy and transparency. But I think in that time since, we've recognized that as there's been a new settlement about these AI practices in newsrooms, we can do better in terms of providing more guidance to publishers as well. So I know our code committee was working very hard to produce more in-depth guidance for publishers and journalists going into 2025, and we look forward to being able to release
Publishing in the next few months.
Yes, I think that's the plan.
And of course, one of the problems for all publishers that's caused by AI is the question of copyright, and the fact that AI will typically sweep original material from other news sites, regurgitate it, and not give credit to the original authors. This is clearly an ethical issue, but it's also a legal issue, and it's one which is going to continue to be potentially really disruptive for the whole news industry, because it simply isn't fair for news producers to spend the money to find the news and then have that news scraped off their website and republished by somebody else who doesn't pay them a penny.
Yes, no, we saw some big deals happen this year between AI companies and news publishers. We also saw some of the early stages of litigation against some of these AI companies for that original scraping of data for training as well. But again, it's sort of unclear at this stage if we're going to go down that pathway of, an adversarial relationship or a sort of cooperative partnership relationship in due course. But we do know it's here to stay, and it will be the large players that probably determine for the industry for a whole what direction that takes. So it's going to be, a really, really interesting time.
Interesting is one word for it. I think potentially a very, very threatening time as well. I think there are the first signs of a potential standoff between democratically elected governments and big media. And we've seen now in Australia the government's intention to stop young people under the age of 18 having access to social media at all. You can well imagine that with the spread of disinformation, democratic governments who find their very futures threatened by the public's belief in stuff which is just not true, governments increasingly will be asking, what can we do to stop Elon Musk through X propagating lies which will impact upon the whole function of democracy? If you misinform the people en masse and then ask them to vote on that basis, you risk destroying the whole fundamental source of democratic legitimacy. And you can see the possibility that the day is going to come when governments have to take on big media in a big way, even threatening bans, disconnecting them. And it's not at all clear, if that were to happen, who would have the most public support, democratically elected government or Elon Musk.
My observation of the US election was how much the presidential candidates both sat with podcasters over sitting down an interview with big newspaper groups. And it doesn't mean that, the newspaper is no longer relevant. It just means that the shape of this is changing. But the way that these outlets are able to leverage influence remains the same. And making sure that ethics, editorial standards, and accountability is wrapped around that, I think, is one of the fundamental issues of our time.
And I think as we enter a period for at least 4 years in the case of America, for another 12 years in the case of Russia, two of the world's most important nuclear powers are going to be run by megalomaniacs who show no evidence of ever having even understood the principle of ethics, and who are self-interested and, in the case of Putin, already all-powerful, and Trump pretty much all-powerful. Very few checks and balances left because he inherits the Supreme Court, which he himself packed with supporters last time round. So we have a world in which there are two key opponents with lots of nuclear weapons run by crazy guys. So quite difficult to be optimistic overall, but let's come back next year and ask the question again.
Absolutely.